And the time has arrived. The full-scale revolution review of Lowkey Soundtrack to the Struggle 3. We're starting off with 3 because it just came out a few months ago, therefore it's highly relevant to many current events. As some of you may know, I did a reaction video when this album first released, but don't bother checking that out because now we have this, the full-scale review. So Lowkey is obviously one of my favorite rappers. He takes up a huge portion on the wall, and that is definitely intentional. I think his music is very hard-hitting. I think it's very on point, and I reference his videos all the time, or I'm talking about someone that's actually featured on those albums. Needless to say that Soundtrack to the Struggle 3 was definitely high on my priority list. I definitely went into it with a lot of hype, maybe a rather high expectation. And while I wouldn't necessarily say that I was disappointed by the project as a whole, I do think that it falls just a step below the standard that was set by Soundtrack to the Struggles 1 and 2. Also keep in mind as we move through this review that this is a very dense album. There's many layers to dive into, so definitely check it out for yourself if any of this sounds interesting to you or this sounds like it's up your alley. And if you like the vibe, definitely like and subscribe. And if you want to support the channel further, there is a Patreon account down below that you can check out if you so choose. Alright, digging into Soundtrack to the Struggle 3, we have track 1 with Soundtrack to the Struggle 3. So the song starts off on a rather tragic note where we have the birth of a child who is then killed in an airstrike, be it a drone or a fighter jet or really just a weapon of war. So you have life and death mixed into this symphony of tragedy. A child being born just to have his life taken away just moments later. And this album as a whole leans heavily into the Isreal-Palestine conflict, and the opening track definitely sets the stage for that. It's all about Gaza, living in the camps, living under horrible conditions. Lowkey goes on to say that it was never about the fashion tags or the massive ads, but for the political prisoners, and that he's not a rapper pulling up the flashy jag, but that his music is for the person on the same street wrapped in rags, or for the father carrying his son in plastic bags. So Lowkey is basically saying that his music and his passion for music is not for the tacky, commercial, plastic, consumerism, materialistic world. That it's for the freedom fighters, the political prisoners, the people undergoing tragedies because they're living under oppression. There's more substance to it. He also has a line about looking at the last 4,000 years of human civilization, which I think is a very interesting thought, and a very interesting perspective to just keep in our minds that, we've only had 4,000 to 6,000 years of human civilization, organized society. And so when we shed our subconscious programming and we actually zoom out and kind of look at human history as a whole, we've already overcome so much that there's no reason why we can't overcome the hurdles that we're facing now, regardless of what our divided media tells us, be it legacy media and now even alternative media. I don't know, pretty wild to think about. Where we came from, to where we are now, to where we could be, if we just all got on the same page and stopped fucking up each other's lives. Is that too much to ask? Probably. The song ends with someone talking about Lowkey and how he could be someone that speaks at the United Nations or someone in UK Parliament. I actually invited Lowkey to speak at my birthday party last year, but he never replied. Nah, but for real, Lowkey, if you ever want to talk about some revolutionary music, do an interview or something, that would be pretty cool. Alright, track 2, Friend or Foe. I absolutely adore this track. It's just one big double entendre where you have the surveillance state or the internet and related technologies personified as a friend. Born in the Congo, raised in China, but he says he's American. My best friend cares about people over everything. So the natural resources that make up our phones and computers, they're mined in the Congo, processed and assembled in China, and then American companies just slap their logo on it and sell it to consumers. That's a really clever opening if you ask me. The song talks about meeting the guy for the first time and he seems like he knows everything, and then there's more subtle cues like chatting through windows, and they both like fruits, but apples were his thing. Windows, Microsoft, apples, Apple, you get it, you get it. So at first, this friend seems like a genuine good guy, and then slowly things start turning for the worse. The second verse talks about how this friend knows some bad things as well, things you shouldn't repeat, and also he has a photographic memory because of course our phones and computers know so much about us. Sometimes even more than we even know of ourselves, which is pretty unsettling, the amount of data that these devices can collect. He listens when I sleep, even when I'm not watching him, because of course our phones are always listening. Always listening. The song also mentions Edward Snowden, who says that this friend is spying for the NSA, and how this best friend was supposed to have our best interest at heart, but it turns out he only had these vested interests at heart. He's smart. Because again, all of these companies are just selling our data on the fucking digital market so that advertisers can have more concentrated advertisements shot right into your eyeballs. And it's great. I mean, it's just wonderful. I mean, it's really fucking great. Keep doing it. Now, Edward Snowden, for those who don't know, he was an American whistleblower who leaked a bunch of secrets from the NSA, basically showcasing their entire spying apparatus. Because of course after 9/11 we had legislation like the Patriot Act, which of course helped the federal government assume more domestic spying capabilities, all in the name of fighting terrorism. Snowden blew the whistle on a number of different capabilities that honestly, when you look at it, it's pretty scary and all-encompassing really, and definitely violates the Fourth Amendment of unreasonable search and seizure, or at least I think it's unreasonable that the government and corporations can sell our data to the highest advertisement dollar, but hey, that's just me. The third verse of Friend or Foe is all from the perspective of that friend, saying, hey man, you weren't complaining when I suggested some new tunes, and how you can look around on the bus or the train, or even just in line at the grocery store or the doctor's office or what have you, and you will see that humanity is hooked on our phones, because of course people are addicted to their phones, their computers, social media. I know I am, for sure. Not even ashamed to admit it. Most of our waking hours are spent on these devices, and we thought that we were the ones using technology, but actually, consequently, it's also using us as well. Very, very solid song. Definitely one of the better tracks on the album. So track 3, Vietnam, starts off with the hook, I don't know about you, but all my heroes fought colonizers. I don't know about you, but all my heroes fought occupiers. Now, to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of this hook, despite largely agreeing with the sentiment. Now, maybe I'm just being too critical here, but a lot of my heroes, they're calling out corruption, hypocrisy, fighting against the individual nodes of the system, or just highlighting some kind of insight to the human experience. Not necessarily an occupier or colonizer, but all of that still coalesces into fighting the same fight, but I digress. This song is basically paying homage to all the freedom fighters, all the protesters, really just anyone that resists against oppression, occupation, colonization. The ones that were sacrificed, the ones that confronted the M16s, fighter jets, and satellites. The second verse talks about how the system has a monopoly on violence and a philosophy of tyrants. Facts. And the horrible conditions that people undergo, which in turn makes them resist. And the third verse is all about those locked up in prison, the POWs, the whistleblowers, the journalists, anyone who fought for freedom, and the price that they paid was imprisonment. So the next track is actually a skit where Lowkey is talking about activism, how we need to think outside the box instead of what's typically sanctioned as activism, and how when the system tells us that resistance is futile, we will respond by saying resistance is fertile. Know what I'm saying? The next track, No War, starts off with P. Styles talking about not letting things divide us, be it race, creed, color, country of origin, favorite video game console, because you're a part of mankind, so be kind to man. Know what I'm saying? And the hook is all about opposing war with Iran, which of course Iran is a very problematic country. They are a theocracy. They do oppress their people. In an ideal world, we would have no war, but in a less ideal world, we would only go to war against genuinely evil people / regimes. But unfortunately, a lot of those regimes and or people were propped up by the United States. We just covered System of a Down's toxicity, and in Prison Song, they say that we prop up corporate-sponsored dictators around the world. But I guess what I was trying to get at is that, I don't support the war in Iraq or Afghanistan, but that's not to say that we didn't accomplish some amount of good by taking out genuinely bad people in those countries. Like, it's not just a black and white issue of war bad or no war good. Saddam was a bastard. He was a terrible fucking person. But unfortunately, he was our bastard because we gave him chemical weapons to go to war with Iran back in the Iraq-Iran war. And Al-Qaeda was also a bunch of dicks, but they were also the people we supported against the Soviets during the Soviet-Afghan war in the 70s and early 80s, when they were the Mujahideen. And even Iran used to be a democracy. But then in Operation Ajax, when we basically performed a coup d'etat against Mohammad Mossadegh, who was trying to nationalize the oil instead of giving it to the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, who was basically just siphoning off the oil and selling it for a profit that the country themselves were not getting. The country themselves were not getting. What? The country itself was not getting. And so when he tried to nationalize those natural resources, he was taken out. And coincidentally enough, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company changed their name 1 year later after that coup to British Petroleum, aka BP. Anyways, I got way off topic. Back to the song. So in the second verse, Lowkey mentions John Pilger, who was a journalist, a war correspondent, and a documentary filmmaker. Looks like he has quite the resume. There's also an interesting line about 25% of humanity being put under US sanctions, which it turns out that does appear to be accurate. Any journalist that speaks out, they choose to ban them. And wonder, what could possess you to fight the powerful? Decolonize the mind and rise. It might empower you. Military-industrial complex. It's a sour truth. They engineer the wars you fight in, even Eisenhower knew. Talking about how President Eisenhower in his farewell address coined the term military-industrial complex, but as I understand it, he actually meant to say congressional military-industrial complex, but he took out the word congressional to not offend his allies in Congress, as I understand it. I could be wrong. Fact check me. Research reality. Now the next track, Baby Steps, is really just a feel-good song about the birth of a child, the joy that it can bring the parent, the realities of being a parent and watching them grow, learning from them. Now for the next track, we're going from babies to basically the opposite, a really, really old guy, Genocide Joe. So the song starts off between 1776 and 2019. The US carried out over 392 military interventions worldwide, killing millions and condemning millions more to a life of agony and despair. Now this whole intro is actually a callback to a previous track on Soundtrack to the Struggle 1, the song Obamanation, talking all about President Obama, where that song starts off, since 1945, the United States government has attempted to overthrow over 50 foreign governments, ending the lives of millions of people in the process and condemning millions more to a life of agony and despair. We're not exactly reviewing Looney Tunes here now, are we? Now, if you don't like these statistics, I get it. You don't have to like them, but I'm just saying there's still plenty of reading material on this subject if you would like to learn a little more. Now, of course, this track is all about the atrocities being committed in Gaza, which, of course, there is a lot of blame to be placed at the feet of Joe Biden. Though, I would like to point out that since Donald Trump has been elected into office, he has removed restrictions using 2,000-pound bombs, allowing Israel to decimate densely populated areas even more so. He also removed sanctions on the settlers in the West Bank, so people can just keep killing people for their homes homes and land without any repercussions. And I believe latest reporting confirms that even all of the foreign aid has been halted, except, of course, for Egypt and Israel. Yep, totally normal actions for a anti-war president. Now, it doesn't make Joe Biden that much better, but it does show a distinction. And also, Trump was just recently talking about how the United States could literally just take over Gaza. Like, we could literally just put it under US control. These are the statements that have been made at time of filming. Not exactly looking great for an anti-war president. To say nothing of the imperialist ambitions of taking over the Panama Canal and Greenland. Anyways, I digress. Been doing that a lot lately. So in Genocide Joe, low-key mentions Aaron Bushell, who was a United States airman who set himself on fire outside the Washington embassy in protest of the atrocities in Gaza, which reminds me of a line from Immortal Technique: live for revolution instead of always dying for it. You can do so much more alive than you can not alive. Breaking news, I know. The song also mentions how the political system is circular, meaning that no matter if it's a Democrat or a Republican in office, it's all still the same thing, it's the same story, it's the same outcome. These people are incredibly indifferent to the problems plaguing the lives of everyday people. And then going to the lyrics, they watch from the drones and they kill with no remorse. You'll never know the hopeless thoughts as you hold a corpse. Which leads us into the outro from Rafat Al-Ayer, who was a Palestinian writer and poet. He's talking about the complete hopelessness of the situation, how there's nowhere to go, there's no food, there's no water, there's no escape. And so what is he supposed to do as an academic? He goes on to say how all he has is an expo marker. But if his home was invaded by Israeli soldiers, he would throw that marker because that's all he had. That's the desperation that these people find themselves in. They have nothing, and therefore they have nothing to lose. Which of course becomes a breeding ground for radicalization, and then you get an increase in recruitments to join the fight, to join the resistance, which perpetuates the conflict further. And Rafat himself was actually killed by an Israeli airstrike after giving an interview to CNN where he said that he and his family had nowhere else to go. Like, how fucking tragic. So then for the next song, we have another skit talking about how there's basically no accountability for those at the top because the system is designed for the people at the top. So the people on the bottom, they just continue to suffer, being dealt the hand that they've been given, while those at the top prosper. How can we let this happen? The skit concludes. Alright, next track, The Killing of Corbynism. So Jeremy Corbyn was a politician in the UK, very similar to Bernie Sanders, someone who was going to make genuine positive change for the average UK citizen, changes that would benefit the working class instead of just those at the top. He was also staunchly anti-imperialist, and just like Bernie Sanders, his campaign did not gel with the current power structure, which did everything in its power to mitigate his success, allowing Boris Johnson to become Prime Minister. And we all know how that turned out. Now, the next three tracks are all very similar. They all deal with the Isreal-Palestine conflict. The next track, titled Palestine Will Never Die, brings up a very good point that a conflict of this scale will require more than a speech, more than a poem, more than a track of music in order to bring this conflict to an end. It'll take much more than a sit down with Bassem Youssef, who is an Egyptian comedian, who also spoke out on this topic. It also mentions the natural gas reserves that have been found in and around Gaza, and apparently it's quite a shit ton of natural gas. And by shit ton, I mean 122 trillion cubic shit tons, according to the United Nations. Now, it would be great if those billions of dollars that would be made from all of that natural gas actually went to the people of Gaza, since it would be their natural resource, and that could then provide basic necessities, basic healthcare, education, build up their economy, build up their infrastructure, basically pay for all of the damage done, even though you can't bring back human lives. And maybe that would all help push people away from radicalization? But that probably won't happen now, will it? Because the wealthy countries and their corporations within their fossil fuel industries need to keep the profits flowing. How will they survive if their billions of dollars in profit starts to dwindle? Just think of the children of those executives. How will they afford Ivy League college? The second to last track, Intifada, which Intifada by definition means Palestinian uprising against the Israeli occupation in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And the coverage here is very similar to the previous songs that we've already touched on. You have kids waving white flags, but they're still being killed, so of course your only option is to fight back. It also mentions DJ Khaled, which I didn't know this, but his parents are actually Palestinian immigrants. And it's interesting, I wonder why he's never touched this topic. There's another line that goes, "Once upon a time across the cities of the West, millions were stressed to see the civilians oppressed. By billions invested in these industries of death, they tried to talk, but the politicians didn't seem impressed." Which brings us to our final song, Two Kites. It starts off with an excerpt from Alan Watts, who I really can't recommend enough. He has hours and hours of content giving really insightful and powerful speeches that are often tied in some way to Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism. Like I said, really good stuff. But the song itself, Two Kites, tells a love story actually about two people who fall in love under occupation. Together they're like two kites floating in the sky, flying together as they soar among the clouds. But then it's alluded that one of them has a secret, and as the story continues, they're exchanging love letters. They're planning to move to a different location where they can be free and live their life in peace. But it turns out that the secret is actually a cancer diagnosis, so they undergo all of the procedures, all of the chemo. They end up surviving the procedure. So they undergo all that hardship, they beat cancer, just to have their lover die in a drone strike. Man, what a bummer. So that concludes the review of Lowkey's Soundtrack to the Struggle 3. Again, obviously the main theme here is Isreal-Palestine, so if you want more content like this, definitely check out the whole album. There's definitely a lot that we did not cover here, but also definitely check out the rest of his discography because he has other songs tied to this topic. But there are several other highlights beyond that topic, such as Friend or Foe, talking about the surveillance state in a pretty clever way, I think. There's also The Death of Corbynism, talking about the need for politicians that actually suit the needs of the people, not just the special interests of those in power. But alright guys, that concludes the review for Lowkey Soundtrack to the Struggle 3. Definitely let me know if there's an album on the wall that you would like to see me review next. If you like the vibe, definitely like and subscribe. If you want to support the channel, check out that Patreon account down below. And until then guys, we will see you on the next video. Later.